"You're too old to matter," he said, smirking, arms crossed, standing in my house. My house. And while I was driving to his Christmas dinner with gifts for his kids, he'd pried open my study door, stolen their college bonds, and drained half my accounts. But that wasn't even the worst part. The next morning I got legal papers. My son filed to have me declared mentally unfit, said I was losing it, said I needed his protection, said I couldn't be trusted with my own money. What he didn't know. I kept receipts for everything, 50 years of proof, neat as ledgers, and I was done being quiet. Now he had me to answer to. My name is Walter Kincaid, and I'm 75 years old. Each morning I maintain the same routine my late wife Margaret and I shared for 52 years in our colonial-style home on Cedar Street. The rich scent of cinnamon coffee drifts from my kitchen while the old radiator in the hallway creaks its familiar song. In my study, I arrange the savings bonds meant for my son Michael's children, Emily and James, my only grandchildren. Michael's been different since his mother's funeral, distant, making pointed remarks about old money sitting idle. My hands steady as I check my phone's new security camera app. Behind me, organized file boxes hold decades of financial records, each matching every deposit and bond. But let me start from the beginning. The Christmas lights blinked along Preston Avenue as I drove toward Michael's house. Red and green reflections rippled across my windshield, each flash taking me closer to what should have been a peaceful family dinner. You know those moments when life shifts beneath your feet? This was mine. My phone chirped from the passenger seat. Probably another "Where are you?" text from Michael. But something in my gut made me ease onto the shoulder and check. The security app notification made my fingers go cold. Motion detected. Study door. I tapped the alert, and the world I knew cracked apart. There on my screen was Michael, my own son, working a crowbar against my study door. The porch light cast harsh shadows across his face as he leveraged the metal bar, his breath visible in the December air. The wood splintered. The sound carried crystal clear through my phone's speaker, that sharp crack of breaking faith. My study alarm chirped once, then fell silent. Michael must have disabled it somehow. He knew the code, of course. We'd trusted him with it years ago. I watched him slip inside, straight to my desk like he'd planned this path. The drawer where I kept the children's savings bonds scraped open. My chest tightened as he thumbed through the labeled envelopes. Emily's college fund, James's future starter home, bonds I'd carefully chosen each birthday, each Christmas, building their foundation one certificate at a time. Michael. His name fell into my empty car, heavy with disbelief. You spend decades teaching a child about honor, about working steady and true, and then watch them tear it all down in minutes. Remember when your kids were small, how you'd catch them in some minor mischief. A cookie before dinner, maybe a fib, about homework. This felt like that, but twisted into something darker, a betrayal that opened a cavern in my chest where trust used to live. I reached out and turned down Bing Crosby on the radio. The four-way stop ahead gave me a moment's pause. Right would take me back home to confront the aftermath. Straight ahead led to Michael's house, where Emma and Jacob would be waiting for Grandpa's presents, where Michael's wife Susan would be setting out her good china. The choice sat heavy in my hands on the steering wheel. Go home and what? Call the police on my own son on Christmas Eve? Or drive on and face him? Look into the eyes of the boy who once helped me clean this very car every Sunday after church? I kept driving straight. Some things need to be handled face to face. The phone went into my pocket, burning like a coal against my leg. Every few minutes, it buzzed with another motion, alert from the study. I didn't need to look, I knew what I'd see. The last stretch to Michael's house felt like driving through molasses. Each Christmas display I passed seemed dimmer, each carol from the radio more hollow. In my mind, I could already hear how the evening would unfold, the cheerful greetings dying in the air, the children's laughter falling silent, everything changing with one simple question. Why did you break into my house? Tonight, son? Overhead, the moon hung full and cold in the winter sky, just like the night I taught Michael to balance his first checkbook at our kitchen table. Slow and steady, I'd told him. That's how you build something that lasts. The memory stung like wind through a broken window. My hands stayed firm on the wheel as I turned onto his street, but inside, everything trembled. You think you know someone, right down to their bones. Then, life shows you differently. Michael's house glowed ahead, warm light spilling from every window. Christmas music drifted faintly through the walls. I pulled into his driveway next to his shiny new SUV that suddenly made more sense. Taking a deep breath, I gathered the wrapped presents from my back seat, gifts chosen with love for a family I thought I knew. The security app buzzed one final time as I reached his front door. My finger hovered over the doorbell, each second stretching like taffy. Behind that door waited a conversation that would shatter our Christmas into pieces no amount of goodwill could mend. I stepped into Michael's warm foyer, the scent of roasting garlic and fresh pine needles washing over me. Susan had outdone herself with the decorating this year, garland wrapped perfectly around the banister, twinkling lights reflecting off the mirror in the entryway. I set my pumpkin pie on the side table, right next to the stack of presents I'd wrapped so carefully the night before. "Dad, you made it!" Susan called from the kitchen. The sounds of pots clanking and water running filtered through the house. "I'm just finishing up the gravy." "Actually," I said, keeping my voice steady, "could I have a quick word with Michael first? Private business matter." Amazing how normal those words came out, how they didn't shake, like my hands wanted to. Michael appeared from his home office, still in his work clothes despite it being Christmas Eve. That designer watch he'd started wearing lately caught the light. "Sure, Dad." "What's up?" I led him into the dining room, away from little ears. The Christmas tree lights blinked through the archway, casting moving shadows across his face. Without a word, I pulled out my phone, opened the security feed, and held up the paused image. Him, clear as day, working that crowbar against my study door. You know that moment when you're watching someone's face and you see the exact second their mask slips? Michael's eyes narrowed first, then his jaw tightened. But what hurt most was watching his expression shift into something I'd never seen before, a cold smirk that aged him 20 years. "Really, Dad? Spying on your own son?" He leaned back against the dining room wall, arms crossed. "You're getting paranoid in your old age. The bonds, Michael. The ones for Emma and Jacob's future." My voice stayed level, though my throat felt like sandpaper. "I want them back by morning." That's when he laughed. Not his real laugh. The warm one I remembered from teaching him to fish or helping with his math homework. This was different, sharp, hollow. Those worthless pieces of paper. He tapped his smartwatch, the same way he used to drum his fingers when he was trying to get out of trouble as a kid. Time's moving too fast to wait around for bonds to mature. The market's hot now, today. While you're sitting on dead money, the real opportunities are passing you by. "Those opportunities belong to your children," I said. Through the archway, I could see Emma and Jacob sprawled on the living room floor, pushing their toy trains around the tree skirt. The same way Michael used to play with his grandfather's old Lionel set. He stepped closer, that unfamiliar smile still playing at his lips. "Let's be honest, Dad. You're too old to matter anymore. The world's changed. While you're counting pennies in your little study, real money's moving at the speed of light." He gestured at his watch again. "Time favors the quick." The impulse to shout rose in my throat like bile, to grab him by the shoulders and shake some sense into him, to demand how he could look at his own children and steal their future. But Emma's laugh rang out from the other room, that pure, innocent sound, and I swallowed it all back down. "We'll talk again in the morning," I said, turning toward the door. "Make this right, son." The December air hit me like a slap when I stepped outside. Funny how the same Christmas lights that had seemed so welcoming on the way in now felt harsh and glaring. My footsteps crunched across the frozen grass to my car. Patience had always been my way. Careful planning, steady progress. But Michael's smirk kept flashing through my mind as I started the engine. Looking back at the house, I saw his silhouette in the doorway watching me leave. Just a dark shape against the warm light inside, like a stranger wearing my son's outline. Well, if he thought I was too old to matter, he'd learn something about the power of proof over patience. Every receipt, every transaction, every careful record I'd kept, they'd speak louder than any argument we could have had tonight. Christmas morning. Funny how the same date can feel so different from one year to the next. Last Christmas, Margaret and I had shared coffee and matching robes she'd bought us, watching cardinals hop through snow on the bird feeder. This year, I sat alone at my desk, hands hovering over the keyboard, dreading what I'd find when I logged into my accounts. You ever have that moment when you know you're about to see something terrible, but you can't look away? That's how it felt, typing in my password, hearing the soft hum of my old desktop computer as it connected to the bank's website. The screen loaded, and my throat went dry. Right there in black and white, transfer confirmations. Half my life savings gone. Routed to an account with Michael's name. Processed just hours after I'd left his house last night. The timestamps blinked at me like accusation lights. 11:42 p.m., 11:47 p.m., 11:53 p.m. While I'd been lying awake in bed, my son had been systematically draining my accounts. My printer whirred to life as I started documenting everything. Transaction IDs, IP addresses, every digital fingerprint he'd left behind. Margaret always teased me about keeping such detailed records, but she'd approved of the habit. Better to have and not need, she'd say, straightening the files in our study. The bank's fraud hotline picked up on the third ring. I kept my voice steady as I explained the situation, requesting emergency holds on everything. The representative's tone shifted from professional to concerned when I mentioned it was my own son. That's the thing about betrayal. It shocks everyone, even strangers. "Sir, I'm so sorry you're going through this," she said. "We'll flag these transactions immediately." While she typed, I pulled up the security camera archive on my second screen. The footage from last night played out again. Michael working the crowbar against my study door, the latch splintering, the alarm chirping its useless warning. I noted the timestamps on these clips too. Evidence is like a wall. Each brick has to be laid just right. The doorbell rang at noon. A courier with an official-looking envelope bearing county seals. I knew, even before breaking the seal, that this was Michael's next move. Standing at my kitchen counter, I read the papers twice to be sure I wasn't misunderstanding. Legal language has a way of making even simple things sound complicated, but the meat of it was clear enough. Michael was petitioning for emergency conservatorship. He'd filed papers claiming I was showing signs of cognitive decline, that my erratic choices threatened family stability. My knuckles went white, gripping the counter's edge. The same counter where I'd helped him with homework, where we'd made Margaret's birthday cakes together, where I'd taught him to balance his first checkbook. Now he was using it all against me. Every senior moment, every brief confusion, twisted into weapons. I found my old corkboard in the study, the one I used to plan our family vacations on. Pinned the notice right in the center. The hearing scheduling window stared back at me. Just weeks to prove my competence before a judge could strip away my independence. I circled the dates in red, underlined mentally unfit 3 times. The words looked alien, like they belonged to someone else's life. The morning sun slanted through my study windows, catching dust motes in its beam. Somewhere out there, Michael was probably feeling pleased with himself, thinking he'd outmaneuvered his old-fashioned father. But he'd forgotten something important. I'd spent a lifetime working with numbers, tracking details, building proof of every transaction. I spread the bank statements and security footage screenshots across my desk. Time to show him that evidence speaks louder than accusations. That truth may be patient, but it doesn't expire. "You want to play hardball, son?" I muttered to the empty room. "Let's see how your story holds up against 50 years of receipts." I walked into First National just as they opened, clutching my folder of printouts. Sarah Chen, the branch manager, had known me since she started as a teller 15 years ago. The worry lines around her eyes deepened when I explained what was happening. "Mr. Kincaid, this is concerning," she said, scanning the transfer records. "Let me put protective flags on everything right away." You know what's funny? Even with everything Michael had done, part of me still felt the need to defend him. "He's not usually—" I started, then stopped. What could I say that he wasn't usually the type to rob his father blind? Sarah's fingers flew over her keyboard. "I'm marking all accounts for enhanced verification. Any withdrawals or transfers will need in-person confirmation with 2 forms of ID." She looked up. "And Mr. Kincaid, we have your signature card on file. If anything comes through that doesn't match, we'll catch it." The walk to the notary's office helped clear my head. Pete's Notary and Print had that familiar musty paper smell that reminded me of my first job in bookkeeping. Pete himself was there, grey-haired, but sharp as ever. "Triple copies of everything," I told him, spreading out my documents. Bonds, statements, security camera logs. I need it all certified. While Pete's stamp thumped against paper, I started making calls. First to the Hendersons next door, then the Patels across the street. Both families had seen me loading presents into my car on Christmas Eve. Simple facts, I thought, solid ground to stand on. But around 3 o'clock, everything shifted. My phone buzzed with messages from my attorney's office. They'd received copies of affidavits from neighbors I barely knew. Mrs. Rodriguez from 3 doors down claimed she'd seen me wandering confused in my bathrobe last week. The new couple on the corner swore I'd missed medication schedules and put my trash out on wrong days. I could see Michael's handiwork in every statement, the careful selection of newer neighbors who didn't know me well, the mix of truth and lies. Yes, I'd worn my robe to get the morning paper, and sure, sometimes trash day slipped my mind. But wandering confused, missed medications. Get me recordings, I told my attorney's answering service. If these people talk to anyone about me, I want to know when and who was present. Back home, I spread the day's work across my desk and started examining signatures on the affidavits. Even through my anger, I had to admire Michael's attention to detail. He'd copied my handwriting well, but not perfectly. The loops in my L's were too round, the pressure points all wrong. I took photos and sent them to Sarah's fraud desk at the bank. The afternoon light was fading when fatigue finally caught up with me. I sank into my study chair, the leather creaking like it always did. The splintered door jamb caught my eye, still raw where Michael's crowbar had done its work. Amazing how something so solid could break so easily. Remember what I said about evidence being like a wall? Well, now I needed to build one that would stand up in court. I pulled out my old ledger, the same one I'd used to track Emma and Jacob's college funds, and started a timeline. 10:15 a.m. Met with Sarah Chen. 11:30 a.m. Notarized documents with Pete. 1:45 p.m. Called Henderson's. 2:20 p.m. Called Patel's. 3:10 p.m. Received fraudulent affidavits. 4:30 p.m. Documented signature. Discrepancies. Each entry got labeled with names, times, related printouts. Margaret would have approved. She always said good records were better than good memory. I noted which security cameras might have caught Michael visiting those neighbors, which bank timestamps proved where I really was during supposed wandering episodes. The study grew darker, but I kept writing. Law offices would open at dawn, and I needed everything organized before then. One thing was certain. I'd need a lawyer who understood elder law and fraud. Someone who could show the court that careful documentation doesn't come from a confused mind. First light hadn't even touched the horizon when I pulled into the law office's parking lot. The security guard recognized me. His daughter had worked summers at my accounting firm years ago. He let me wait in the warm lobby, my timeline and documents spread across my lap. At precisely 8, Linda Park walked in, briefcase in one hand, coffee in the other. Her silver-streaked bob and wire-rimmed glasses gave her the look of someone who'd seen every trick in the book. "Walter Kincaid?" she asked, extending her hand. "Sarah Chen from First National called ahead. Let's talk." You know that feeling when you finally find someone who speaks your language? That's how it felt watching Linda review my documents. No dramatic gasps or sympathetic headshakes, just quick, precise notes and pointed questions. "The security footage is crucial," she said, tapping my phone's screen. "Most children who attempt this kind of financial abuse are careful not to leave such clear evidence." She adjusted her glasses. "But we need to move fast. Every hour matters with liquid assets." I remembered Margaret saying something similar when we'd first started saving. Money moves like water. Find the high ground and build walls. Linda was already drafting emergency motions, while her assistant made copies of my timeline. "The advantage of video evidence," Linda explained, "is that it directly contradicts the mental capacity claims. Someone truly suffering cognitive decline doesn't maintain detailed financial records or install security systems." By 10:30, we had motions filed for emergency account freezes. Linda's fingers flew across her keyboard, building our case with the precision of a master craftsman. "The court usually expedites these when there's clear evidence of unauthorized access," she said. At 11:45, my phone buzzed. The first freeze order had gone through. The savings account Michael had tried to drain on Christmas morning was now locked tight. My shoulders dropped an inch, and I realized I'd been holding them tense for days. "One down," Linda said, allowing herself a small smile. "But let's not celebrate yet. We need to—" Her phone rang, cutting her off. While she answered, I checked my own banking app, something I'd been doing compulsively since Christmas. That's when I saw it, the money market account I'd opened back in '92. The one that had held steady through 3 recessions, empty. The transaction date was December 23rd, 2 days before I caught Michael on camera. My throat went dry. He'd been planning this longer than I thought. "Walter?" Linda was watching me. I turned my phone to show her the screen. "Add it to the timeline," she said firmly. "Every loss helps build our case." Back in my study, I pulled out a red marker, Margaret's old grading pen, and added a new column to my timeline, confirmed losses. The money market account went at the top, its balance written in clean, stark numbers. Never thought I'd be documenting my own son's theft like this. Linda's office had given me proper evidence bags for the security camera clips. I sealed each one, signing across the seal like she'd shown me. Chain of custody, she called it. Every handoff documented, every viewing logged. The kind of details that make or break a case. Sorting through the day's mail later, I found something that made my stomach twist. A credit card statement I didn't recognize. The card was in my name, but the address was somewhere in Henderson I'd never heard of. Cash advances, one after another, maxing out a credit line I hadn't approved. That envelope joined the others on my evidence board, a growing map of betrayal marked in pins and red ink. I labeled it unauthorized outflow in block letters that would have made my old Navy penmanship instructor proud. Night settled in, and I found myself at the kitchen table, surrounded by neat piles of bank statements and credit card bills. The wind had picked up, whistling through the crack where Michael's crowbar had splintered my study door. Each gust carried away another small piece of what I'd thought was unshakable. A father's trust, a son's honor, a lifetime's careful planning. I picked up another statement, adding its numbers to my growing ledger of losses. The kitchen clock ticked steadily onward, marking time like it always had, indifferent to how much could change in just a few days. The first Monday of January dawned bitter cold. I'd gotten used to starting my days early, a habit from 50 years of bookkeeping. But that morning felt different, heavier somehow. Maybe it was the way the new year stretched ahead, full of uncertainties I'd never planned for. Linda's office was warm, at least. She had one of those fancy electric fireplaces going in the corner, and for a moment I let myself remember the wood-burning stove Margaret and I had in our first apartment. The scent of cedar, her reading glasses fogged up from the heat. But memories weren't going to help me now. "Let's talk timeline," Linda said, spreading a fresh legal pad on her desk. She had one of those oversized wall calendars behind her, the kind with the whole month visible at once. My eyes caught on a date she'd circled in red, January 15th. "That's our hearing date," she said, following my gaze. "Judge Matthews likes to move quickly on capacity cases." She leaned forward, folding her hands. "Walter, I need you to understand exactly what we're up against. By January 15th, we must prove 2 things. First, that you're fully capable of managing your affairs, and second, that Michael's petition is motivated by financial gain rather than genuine concern." The Shiu date seemed to pulse on that calendar like a warning light. 15 days. Just 15 days to defend 75 years of independence. "What happens if we can't prove it by then?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Temporary conservatorship at minimum," Linda replied, "which would give Michael control of your finances while a full evaluation is conducted." She paused, adjusting her glasses. "And once that door opens, it's very difficult to close." When I got home, I went straight to my evidence board. Right across the top, I wrote in bold letters, "Ticking clock, Jan 15. Every time I looked at it, that date would remind me what I was fighting for. Linda had given me a checklist of immediate actions. First up, medical evaluations. We needed recent documentation of my cognitive health. Not just my regular doctor, but a geriatric specialist and maybe a neurologist. She'd already identified 3 who could see me on short notice. "Your son's going to present every minor memory lapse as evidence of decline," she'd warned. "We need experts who can distinguish normal aging from actual impairment." Next came the witness list. My pharmacist, Tom, was first. He could verify I'd never missed a prescription refill. Then my accountant, who'd seen my tax returns for 20 years. The bank manager who'd helped me set up those security cameras. Each name went on the board, connected to what they could testify about. "What about Judge Matthews?" I'd asked Linda. "What's his take on cases like this?" She'd given me one of those careful lawyer looks, then shrugged slightly. The kind of shrug that says more than words could. I added "judge" to my board with a question mark. Back in my kitchen now, I put the kettle on for tea, one of Margaret's old habits I'd kept up. While it heated, I spread Linda's checklist on the table. Medical appointments to schedule, witness statements to collect, bank records to compile. Each task had a deadline, counting backward from January 15th. The kettle whistled, sharp and insistent like an alarm. I had just enough time for this cup before the banks opened. Then the real work would begin, tracing every transaction, documenting every unauthorized withdrawal, building the case that would prove I didn't need anyone's protection but my own. 15 days. The steam rose from my cup and I watched it dissipate in the winter light. 15 days to defend everything I'd built. The clock on my kitchen wall ticked steadily, each sound marking another moment gone, another moment closer to that January morning when a stranger in black robes would decide if I could still be trusted with my own life. I pulled my phone closer. The banks would open in 20 minutes. I had calls to make. You ever notice how defeat always comes calling around midnight? There I was at my kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of bank statements and legal notes, and all I could hear was the mocking tick of that wall clock. Every sheet of paper felt heavier than the last, like they were made of lead instead of wood pulp. I thought back to how Margaret used to handle our finances, her reading, glasses perched just so, steady hands moving across the checkbook. She'd developed this system with different colored folders, utilities in blue, investments in green, everything sorted neat as you please. What would she say if she could see our kitchen table now buried under this mess of betrayal? Michael's laugh echoed in my head, that dismissive chuckle when I'd shown him the security footage. Too old to matter, he'd said. Like 75 years of living counted for nothing. Maybe he was right. Here I was, past midnight, trying to make sense of transaction codes and routing numbers that seemed to blur together. You know that feeling when exhaustion hits and your eyes just won't focus anymore? When the words swim around like fish you can't catch? That's where I was. I let my forehead drop onto my forearms, right there on top of all those papers. The kitchen light hummed above me, and I thought about just giving up, just letting Michael win. Maybe it would be easier that way. Then came the knock. 3 soft taps, quiet but deliberate. I lifted my head, squinting at the clock. 11:47 p.m. Who in their right mind? "Walter," a familiar voice called through the door. "You still up?" Frank Donovan stood on my porch, thermal coffee container in hand, looking like he'd just walked out of one of our fishing trips. Same weathered face, same no-nonsense expression. We'd spent 20 years swapping stories over lake water, but I'd never been so glad to see him as I was right then. "Figured you might need some reinforcements," he said, stepping inside. He set the thermos down and surveyed my paper-strewn table. "Linda Park called. Said you could use someone who knows how to follow money." I must have looked confused because he added, 30 years in, banking, Walt. I've seen every trick in the book and wrote a few chapters myself." He unscrewed the thermos cap, and the rich smell of coffee filled my kitchen. "Paper trails don't lie. They just need someone who speaks their language." He pulled up a chair, poured 2 cups and reached for the nearest stack of statements. "Account numbers," he said. "Bond serials, transfer confirmations. Let's see what story they're telling." For the next hour, Frank and I mapped it all out. He showed me how to track the money's movement, dates, amounts, destination accounts. We used arrows and highlighters, creating a visual web of transactions. Little by little, patterns emerged. "See this here?" Frank pointed to a series of transfers. "Classic shell game. Money moves from account to account, each time getting harder to trace. But look at the amounts. They're regular, monthly payments. Payments for what? If I had to guess? Gambling debts?" Frank circled several numbers. "These match typical loan shark rates. Your boy's been burning through cash, and not just yours." Something clicked in my brain. The fog of defeat lifted, replaced by clarity sharp as winter air. This wasn't just about Michael stealing my money. He was desperate, servicing debts I hadn't known existed. "We need to document everything," Frank said, pulling a fresh legal pad toward him. "Every institution these funds touched, every account they passed through." He started writing, his pen scratching against paper with purpose. "Tomorrow morning, we start making calls, each bank, each transfer point. Build the paper trail until there's nowhere left to hide. I felt energy returning to my tired muscles. We worked another hour, crafting call scripts for each financial institution. Frank knew exactly what questions would get answers, which departments to ask for, what terminology to use. "Remember," he said, tapping his coffee cup for emphasis, "you're not just some confused old man they can brush off. You're a customer demanding answers about unauthorized activity. Lead with the fraud angle. Make them take you seriously." The next morning, Frank and I hit the phones before most people had their first cup of coffee. We set up camp at my kitchen, table, speakerphone between us, statements spread out like battle plans. You ever notice how different your voice sounds when you're fighting for something that matters? Mine had found its backbone again. "Yes, I need wire confirmation for transactions dated December 24th through 26th, I said into the speaker, following Frank's script word for word. "Account ending in 4721. Frank gave me a thumbs up, jotting notes as we waited on hold. Muzak drifted through the speaker, some garbled version of The Girl from Ipanema that took me back to endless afternoons in bank lobbies with Margaret, setting up the kids' college funds. Funny how memories sneak up on you like that. "Mr. Kincaid," the bank representative's voice cut through my nostalgia. "I'm showing multiple outbound transfers during that period. I'll need to generate a detailed report." "Perfect," Frank jumped in. "And we'll need beneficiary details for each destination account." We played this game for hours, building our paper trail one phone call at a time. Each new document revealed another piece of the puzzle. Frank's eyes lit up when the faxes started rolling in. "Look here," he said, pointing to a series of transactions. "These processor codes, online gambling sites. And these." His finger slid down to another group. "Cash advance services. Your boy's been busy?" I leaned in closer, squinting at the numbers. "How much are we talking about? Based on just these statements?" Frank whistled low. "North of 50 grand in the last 3 months alone. But that's just what we can see directly." Then he found it. The shell company. "Triple Crown Ventures, LLC," Frank read aloud. "Registered in Delaware. Routing payments to offshore accounts. Classic setup for covering sportsbook losses." I grabbed my timeline from the corkboard and started matching dates. The biggest transfers aligned perfectly with when Michael broke into my study. Like watching puzzle pieces click into place, it all made horrible sense. "He wasn't just stealing from me," I said quietly. "He was drowning." Frank helped me assemble everything into a folder labeled Motive Gambling Debt. Each page told its part of the story, the desperate spiral that had turned my son into the thief. The phone rang again around 2 o'clock, Linda Park's number. "Walter," she said, her voice tight, "there's something you need to know about Judge Benton." The name was familiar. Harold Benton, assigned to hear Michael's petition. I'd seen him around town, usually wearing one of those fancy golf shirts from the country club. "He plays golf with Michael," Linda continued, "twice a month at Pine Valley. They're regular partners in the weekend foursome." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. I gripped the edge of the table, sitting very still while the room steadied itself. Frank's hand landed on my shoulder, solid as an anchor. "Can we request a different judge?" I asked. "Conflict of interest? Unlikely." Linda's sigh crackled through the phone. "Small county, limited bench. Benton would have to recuse himself and he's not going to pass up helping his golf buddy." I finished. "Not without overwhelming evidence," Linda agreed. "We need to make any hint of bias too costly to risk. Every exhibit, every document has to be ironclad." After we hung up, Frank and I looked at each other across the mess of papers. Without a word, he reached for the scanner I used for tax documents. "Better get comfortable," he said, feeding the first statement through. "We're going to make copies of copies until every decimal point is backed up 6 ways from Sunday." We worked straight through the afternoon. The winter sun dropped behind the maple trees outside my window, their bare branches casting long shadows across the kitchen floor. Each document we scanned felt like another sandbag in the wall we were building, protection against not just Michael's lies, but now against a system that seemed stacked in his favor. Frank paused mid-scan, looking over at me. "You doing all right with all this?" I thought about Michael as a kid, helping me organize my receipts for tax season, playing with the adding machine like it was a video game. When did that boy become someone who could laugh while destroying everything his mother and I had built? "I'm angry," I admitted, but mostly I'm just tired of being underestimated. The night before the hearing, my kitchen looked like a war room. Linda and Frank had pushed my folding card table against the counter, covering every inch with color-coded binders and stacks of receipts. The old fluorescent light hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across our tired faces. "Let's go through the exhibit list one more time," Linda said, sliding a blue folder toward me. Her voice had that steady tone lawyers use when they're being extra careful. "Bank statements first." I picked up my pen and started signing next to each tab. "All other transfer records are here?" "Chronological order," Frank confirmed, tapping the thickest binder. "Every transaction from the past 6 months, with the gambling patterns highlighted in yellow. The shell company documentation is tabbed in red. You know that feeling when you're packing for a long trip, and you can't shake the sense you're forgetting something vital. That's how my stomach felt as we worked through the paperwork. Each signature felt like another stone being laid in a wall that had to hold. "Now the security footage," Linda continued, pushing forward a stack of screenshots. "We've got timestamps, metadata, and full technical specifications from the app company. I remembered installing that app on a whim, just a nagging feeling that needed answering. Funny how intuition works sometimes, isn't it?" "The camera caught everything?" I asked, though I'd watched those clips enough times to see them in my sleep. Linda nodded. "Clear view of the break-in, the desk, the bonds being taken. Authentication is solid, but expect objections. Michael's lawyer will try to keep it out?" The pen paused above the exhibit list. "They'll argue anything they can," she confirmed, "but we've got chain of custody receipts for the digital files. 2 separate drives, both labeled and verified." Frank had been quiet, methodically, checking off items on his own list. Now he looked up. "My declaration's ready. Full analysis of the financial patterns, professional opinion on the shell company structure. 25 years in banking carries some weight." Linda turned to me. "Let's run through your testimony points again. Daily routine first." I sat straighter, falling into the rhythm we'd practiced. "Up at 6:30. Coffee and medication with breakfast. I can show you my pill organizer if you'd like. Bills paid on the 1st and 15th, balanced against the check register. I can walk you through last month's utility payments line by line." "Good," Linda nodded. "Direct and detailed. Now about the medication schedule." Color-coded caps. I pulled out my organizer. Morning doses in blue, evening in red. Pharmacy records show consistent refills for the past 3 years. No gaps, no early renewals. The kitchen. Clock ticked past 11. January 15th was pressing down like a heavy lid, but we kept working. I'd placed Margaret's old fountain pen in my jacket pocket earlier, the one she used to grade papers with. Just having it there helped steady my hands. "One last run-through on the camera files," Linda said, opening her laptop. The footage played silently. Michael with his crowbar, the splintering door, the desk drawer yanked open. My son becoming a thief in 12 minutes of high-definition video. "Chain of custody is crucial here," she reminded me, printing fresh receipts. "Every person who's handled these files, every copy made, every transfer logged. Make it bulletproof." I signed the receipts while Frank packed the drives into padded envelopes. The briefcase by my chair was already stuffed with binders, but somehow we made it all fit. "Set your alarm for 6, Linda advised, gathering her coat. "We'll meet at the courthouse at 7:30. Review session in the conference room before we go in." Frank helped me carry the briefcase to my study. "Get some sleep, Walter," he said, squeezing my shoulder. "You've done the work. Now we just have to show them." I walked them both to the door, then stood watching their headlights fade down the street. The house felt enormous and quiet. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. But tonight, I had Margaret's pen in my pocket, truth in my briefcase, and a lifetime of careful habits to back up every word I'd speak. Setting the alarm, I thought about Michael's smirk when I'd confronted him on Christmas Eve. "Too old to matter," he'd said. The hearing would test that theory, one exhibit at a time. I'd been in courtrooms before. Traffic tickets, jury duty, that kind of thing. But walking into Judge Benton's chamber that morning felt different, like stepping onto a stage where everyone knew their lines except me. The room had that polished wood smell you get in places where important decisions happen. You know the type? Makes you want to whisper even before they tell you to. A row of golf trophies gleamed on a corner shelf, and there, right behind them, was a framed photo of the judge and Michael on some fancy-looking course, both grinning at the camera with clubs in hand. Ever notice how some smiles are really just people showing their teeth? That's what I saw when Michael's attorney nodded to the bailiff, less greeting, more predator sizing up prey. Made my spine stiffen just watching it. "Please, state your name for the record," the clerk intoned when I took the stand. The wood creaked under me as I settled in. Walter James Kincaid. Linda started with the basics. My background, daily routine, the careful system of files and records I'd kept since Margaret and I bought our first home. My voice stayed steady, just like we'd practiced. When we got to the security app, I explained how I'd installed it myself after reading the manual cover to cover. That's when I caught Judge Benton's first frown. Just a flicker, but it was there. "And this technological solution," he interrupted. "You managed all the settings yourself?" "Yes, Your Honor. The interface is quite straightforward." Michael's attorney practically jumped up. "Your Honor, permission to inquire about the witness's familiarity with modern technology?" Granted. And there it was, the trap I'd seen coming. He started gentle, almost concerned. "Mr. Kincaid, isn't it true you've called your son several times for help with your TV remote? Once when the cable company changed their system. And your smartphone. How many times have you needed assistance with that?" I kept my voice level. I learned what I needed to know, just like I learned that security app. "Moving to more recent events," he pressed. "Haven't you missed several appointments this past year? Forgotten names of longtime neighbors?" Linda objected, but the judge let it continue. I watched his neutral expression, noticed how his eyes never quite met mine. "If we could play the security footage," I suggested, my hand steady as I pointed to the laptop. "The timestamps and image quality speak for themselves." Michael shifted in his seat behind the attorney's table. I'd never seen his jaw so tight. Reminded me of when he was small, fighting tears after skinning his knee. But he wasn't that little boy anymore, was he? The footage started playing on the courtroom screen. The timestamp, clear as day, December 24th, 7:15 p.m. There was Michael, crowbar catching the porch light as he forced my study door. The splintering wood seemed louder in the quiet courtroom. Judge Benton watched without expression, but I caught that tiny head shake when he glanced at Linda, like they were sharing some private joke at my expense. My throat felt dry suddenly, and I reached for the water glass. The cross-examination continued, each question aimed at painting me as a confused old man who couldn't possibly understand modern technology or manage his own affairs. The judge allowed every leading question, every subtle dig. I thought of Margaret's fountain pen in my pocket, wrapped my fingers around it, and remembered her voice. "Patience wins more battles than anger ever could." Linda's redirect helped some. She walked me through the medication logs, bank statements, and utility bills, all perfectly maintained. But I could feel it in the air, that this wasn't about evidence anymore. This was about a script written on a golf course, sealed with handshakes and knowing looks. When Linda finally said, "One more witness, Your Honor, Francis Donovan," I heard the shift in the room, like a door opening just a crack, letting in fresh air. I stepped down from the witness stand, my legs steadier than I'd expected. Frank caught my eye as we passed, and I saw the same quiet determination there that I'd felt at my kitchen table that late night. Paper trails don't lie, and Frank was about to prove it. Frank walked to the witness stand like he was heading to his old bank office. Calm, measured, professional. You wouldn't guess he'd been up half the night double-checking every number we'd found. "Please state your credentials for the court," Linda began. "Francis Donovan, retired Senior Vice President of Commercial Banking at First Regional, 38 years experience in financial forensics and fraud prevention." I watched Michael's attorney straighten up. This wasn't some doddering retiree he could trip up with questions about TV remotes. Frank laid it out like he was teaching a class. "I began by tracking wire transfers from Mr. Kincaid's accounts." He gestured to the projection screen. Each withdrawal was immediately routed through this shell company, Triple Crown Holdings, LLC. The judge's pen stopped moving. Even he couldn't ignore the clear arrows Frank had drawn, showing my money flowing straight to online gambling processors. "Triple Crown Holdings," Frank continued, "was established 3 months ago with a single member, Michael Kincaid." A murmur rippled through the gallery. I kept my eyes on Michael, watching his confident smirk crack just a little. "These highlighted transactions," Frank pointed to a column of red figures, "show regular payments to 3 different sportsbook operations. The pattern suggests attempting to cover mounting losses by accessing new funding sources. Linda handed him another document. "And what is this schedule you're reviewing now?" "A planned liquidation timeline for Mr. Kincaid's home, apparently to be executed immediately upon securing conservatorship." Frank adjusted his reading glasses. "The property would be sold well below market value to a holding company, which interestingly enough shares an address with Triple Crown Holdings." That got Judge Benton's attention. I watched his spine stiffen as he studied the documents more closely. Funny how clear things become when you can't pretend not to see them anymore. "Your Honor," Linda stood, "we have additional evidence of forged signatures on multiple documents, including—" "That won't be necessary." Judge Benton's voice cut through the air like a blade. His earlier casual demeanor had vanished. "I've seen enough. You could have heard a pin drop in that courtroom." Michael was staring straight ahead, all the color drained from his face. "Petition for conservatorship is denied." The judge's gavel crack seemed extra sharp. "Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of criminal theft and fraud." The breath I'd been holding rushed out like I'd been frozen solid and was finally starting to thaw. Linda squeezed my arm, and Frank gave me that slight nod that said more than words could. "Mr. Kincaid," the judge addressed me directly now, no trace of his earlier dismissive tone, "you may wish to pursue civil remedies as well. The court can provide you with relevant resources." I just nodded, watching Michael being approached by two plainclothes officers. They weren't cuffing him, not yet, but they were definitely taking down his information. After thanking Linda and Frank, I pulled out Margaret's fountain pen and a notepad. Time to call the locksmith about that splintered study door. As I wrote the note, my hand was perfectly steady. Stepping into the hallway, I could already hear the buzz of phones and whispered conversations. The story would be all over town by dinner. The son who tried to steal his father's home. The confused old man who'd tracked every penny and proved them all wrong. The morning after the hearing, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. I'd barely finished my first cup of coffee when the messages started rolling in. "Sarah from church. Just heard what happened. We're all here for you, Walter." Bill, my pharmacist. "Those accusations about mixed-up medications. Pure garbage. Told everyone who'd listen, you've never missed a refill in 15 years. Even Tom next door, who'd signed one of those affidavits about my confused trash days, sent a rambling apology. Michael came by, said you were getting forgetful. I should have talked to you first. Feel terrible about it. You know how news travels in a small town like wildfire through dry brush. By mid-morning, I was hearing snippets everywhere. At the hardware store, two fellows quickly changed their conversation when they saw me, but not before I caught his own father's money and gambling debts. The local golf club's newsletter landed in my inbox. Funny timing, that. There was Michael's name, quietly removed from the winter tournament committee. Later, checking the community bulletin board at the market, I spotted a hastily revised sponsor list for his bowling league. 3 business names scratched out, just like that. "Morning, Walter," Betty at the checkout whispered like she was sharing a secret. Just terrible what families will do these days. She wasn't really asking for details, just letting me know she knew. That's how it works around here. Everyone tells you they know without quite saying what they know. The locksmith Dave showed up right on time at 2. Good man, been working these streets longer than I have. He took one look at the splintered frame and shook his head. "Crowbar did this?" he asked, running his fingers along the torn wood. "Shame. Solid oak, this frame. Don't see craftsmanship like this anymore." While he worked on the new deadbolt, I got busy with fine grit sandpaper, smoothing down the worst of the damage. Couldn't erase it completely. Some scars you learn to live with, but I could make it clean again. Proper. "Testing the strike plate now," Dave called out, then clicked the latch a few times. "Solid as a rock. Nobody's forcing this one." I paid him, then drove down to Mason's Garden Center. They still had a few fresh wreaths left, deep green with a simple red ribbon. No bells, no glitter, just honest pine and cedar, the kind Margaret would have chosen. Back home, I hung it carefully over the newly repaired door. The scent of fresh evergreen filled the study, mixing with lemon oil from the desk I'd just polished. Standing there, I pulled out my phone and added Frank and Linda to the security notifications. Better to have backup eyes, just in case. The late afternoon sun slanted through my window, catching the brass desk lamp Margaret gave me on our 40th anniversary. I straightened the stack of ledgers, every transaction noted, every paper in its place. My hands didn't shake anymore when I handled them. The room felt right again, not because I'd won, but because truth has a way of settling things back into place, like gravity working on a tilted picture frame until it finds its level. I touched the wreath's fresh needles, breathing in that clean pine scent. Words rose up, not bitter, just matter of fact. Greed destroys its own master.